Anthony Albanese. Anthony, thank you for joining us.
Good to be with you both.
Now, Anthony, no one can ever deny your passion about infrastructure. So can we come to the budget? One of the things that you've been on about for a long time was the Inland Rail. And I just want to talk about whether there's a difference between the rhetoric and the delivery. I support this project like you do. I just worry, where are we with the alignment? And what are we doing about the link to the port in Brisbane? So tell us what your view about the proposal in the budget was.
Well, I am a supporter of the Inland Rail project. We put in government $900 million into the project, $600 million for fixing the existing alignment, because a lot of this project isn't new track, it's just upgrading of old sections, and then about 40% is new. So we put $300 million into the budget for the preservation of the corridor and the early pre-construction work. My concern now is that the government has, before the budget, set it up with this good debt, bad debt idea of putting it off budget. So they've allocated some $8.3 billion, but it's all off budget. And when you look at the actual project, it's going to stop at Acacia Ridge. So that leaves about 86 kilometres between there and the Port of Brisbane. And it's the most expensive bit because you have to tunnel. So what are you going to do? Put these double-decker trains, get the containers and put them onto trucks and go through the residential streets of the most built-up area of Brisbane in order to get to the port? That doesn't make any sense. It's a fix over the finances rather than a proper infrastructure planning process. And that's what I'm concerned about with this project. We do need to get it right, and getting it right means that we actually take the freight somewhere, and that means taking it to the port.
Yeah, well, the point about Acacia Ridge is absolutely right, because as two people who represented this area, we can tell you, Anthony, that would be incredibly unpopular running those.
A lot of politics around that.
That's right, you're absolutely right, there'd have to be a tunnel. Can I come to the finances of this? I read somewhere that it would take something like 50 years to get the return on the capital investment for this rail line. Is that right?
Well, that's what John Anderson said in the report to the government, which is why some of the funding, at least, surely needed to be on budget, not pretending this is going to have a rate of return. Now, we raised that to go back a little bit, I guess, to put things off budget for a government business enterprise. What needs to be shown is that there will be a return to the budget. So the National Broadband Network will produce a return to taxpayers, therefore it can be funded off budget. This project, on its own assessment, done by PwC for the government on behalf of John Anderson, the committee that he chaired, said it wouldn't produce a return to capital of the capital expenditure for more than 50 years. And that's why I think you have this project stopping at Acacia Ridge, because that decreases the cost of the project by maybe $4 billion in order to, well, at least because the tunnelling's the most expensive part. And then you have, in Senate estimates, the department say that in order to make this stack up as an off-budget project, they're going to look at the Australian Rail Track Corporation's return as a whole. So effectively, the lines of the ARTC, that's a government-owned entity that will be building the Inland Rail, that currently make a substantial profit, and the main one of that is the Hunter Valley Coal Network, will be used to subsidise the Inland Rail. Now, that's just a fiddle, frankly. And I think with a project like this, which is good, which will take trucks off the road, that will be important for cities like Parkes to be able to expand in Western New South Wales, that will take pressure off the coastal route. There's a range of reasons why this project's good. But for the government to pretend that it can all be done for free in terms of actual on-budget expenditure is, I think, frankly, a triumph of hope over practical analysis, and already I think that's beginning to unravel.
Albo, can I go somewhere else, if I may, please? And that's Sydney's new airport, the second airport. We had a great example of what the private sector can do in the last few years in Queensland. Between 2011 and 2014, the Wagner family up in Toowoomba managed to build a brand new international airport, and they built it at a rock bottom price. Well, you got any comments to make about the plan and the time frame for the second airport in Sydney?
Well, I think the Wellcamp Airport, I've visited that airport, and it's fantastic, and it's a great example of the private sector being able to achieve a very good outcome for Toowoomba and the Darling Downs. All of that region will benefit from that airport. The Sydney West Airport is, of course, something very different. Sydney West Airport is servicing some 2.2 million people right now live in Western Sydney. That will grow over the next couple of decades by another million. So it will largely be servicing both in terms of freight and in terms of, most importantly, passengers, both domestic and international aviation. It will be a substantial airport, and it's an opportunity to create jobs and really drive economic activity. I'm a supporter of the airport. The model that's been done, I think, is a result of, I think, a bad decision, frankly, by the Howard government to offer the first right of refusal to the existing owners of Sydney Airport.
They've knocked that back, though, haven't they? But
they knocked it back.
Well, isn't that a good thing?
And so, well, that was a commercial decision which they've made. The government, I think, under those circumstances, probably had no alternative but to proceed by themselves, because no doubt if it had been offered up to other private sector bids, you potentially had some legal issues would have been raised about whether the offer was exactly the same. As it is now, it will get done. And that's the important thing. It will get done. It's important, as it gets done, that jobs are created for people in Western Sydney. It's important that, and I've had discussions with the government about our proposal, which is that for all infrastructure projects where there's government involved, needs to be at least 10% of local apprenticeships created. Let's create the skills and lift the base while we're building infrastructure. And this is, I think, an exciting project, but it needs to be got right. There needs to be public transport there
on that,
from day one.
Yeah. Well, can I ask you about how the Labor Party would see the public transport being provided and how that should be funded in the most appropriate manner?
Well, we think that the North-South corridor, along with all of the councils in Western Sydney, so one of the problems with our major cities is that everything can go to the CBD in theory, but in practice with a city like Sydney, it's great geographical advantages of the harbour and the rivers, the topography that's there, make it very difficult. So you need to have transport linkages, not just all going into the hub and spoke approach, but also along north-south corridors. So a rail line essentially from Campbelltown, the Macarthur region, up through Badgerys Creek Airport up to near St Mary's and connecting with Rouse Hill will really open up economic development in Western Sydney. Some of the project, no doubt, can be funded by value uplift as a result of the growth that's happening there. Just to give you one example, the Science Park just to the north of the airport will attract some $5 billion of private sector investment for high-end jobs, including, of course, an on-campus K-12 science, technology, engineering and maths school, where there's already an MOU with the Catholic Education Office. Now, these are the sort of opportunities where the airport will be a catalyst for that investment. But we need to make sure that we get it right with a rail link, which also then goes through to Leppington and connects up with the South West Rail. If people want to look at other potential links that are there to Parramatta or even a high-speed rail thing, by all means, that's worthy of consideration. But the main thing is making sure that people in Western Sydney themselves can benefit from the jobs that will occur from what should be an aerotropolis. It shouldn't be just a runway and a terminal. It should be seen as an enormous opportunity.
Anthony, one of the other areas that's causing a lot of angst in the infrastructure area, particularly in Brisbane, is the Cross River Rail link. That seems to be a bit of a mess. Where is it exactly, based on what the government's promised and what they plan to do?
Well, a great disappointment in this budget is the announcement of a so-called $10 billion National Rail Fund, of which there's $0 this year, zero next year, zero the year after, and $200 million in 4 years' time. I mean, that's a farce. So it was a big announcement with nothing behind it. Malcolm Turnbull likes riding on trains. He's got to start funding them. And the Cross River Rail project, as you both know, was approved by Infrastructure Australia in 2012. Myself and Campbell Newman, the Premier, showed that you could cooperate. We were prepared, as was Campbell Newman's government, prepared to put in $715 million, respectively. And then we had an availability payment model. There was going to be uplift around Woolloongabba Station. It was ready to go. And the thing that stopped it was Tony Abbott essentially saying that the Commonwealth wouldn't fund public transport projects and would withdraw, and he did indeed, withdraw all funding from any project that wasn't under construction. And I think that was really a lost opportunity. I must say the work that I did with Campbell on Legacy Way is there for all to see. You can have cooperation across political parties, and that's what people want. That's what we're doing on Sydney West Airport, and the result is that it's going ahead. What it needed isn't just government, but opposition to be on the same page there. And the Cross River Rail project, for goodness sake, it would have been creating, in the meantime, literally thousands of jobs. And it's important, of course, not just for the people of Brisbane, but for the capacity of the network on the Gold Coast and indeed on the Sunshine Coast.
That's exactly right. Well, there you go, mate. Hey? So you'd be on side with it?
Well, I guess so, yes.
We had good discussions.
Well,
we were ready to go, Campbell.
Perhaps the problem is now they're not leasing the assets, but I'll move on.
Well, he's agreeing with you, Anthony.
He's ready to go.
Well, we were actually. And, yeah, I think the history of it was pretty accurate. Yeah, pretty accurate. Yeah,
well, good
I've got
stuff.
to say that, yeah.
Well, talking about cities, and we'll come back to that.
I used to get into trouble, Campbell, by saying that I was a Labor Party minister who was able to sit down with you cooperatively. But I did that with a range of ministers, regardless of their political colour, across the country. And that really, I actually think that from time to time, that really is what people want to see.
Well, we need a lot more of that now.
Not people yelling at each other.
We need a lot more of that. Anthony, the issue about house prices in Sydney, you're the Minister for the cities. It seems to me, that if there can be a fast train to places like Wollongong, Newcastle, you can do the same in Melbourne. A lot of people can live there in areas where the housing's a lot cheaper but work in Sydney. Why aren't we doing that?
Oh, exactly. Well, one of the things that we did in government was a substantial two-part study. It showed, for example, that the Sydney to Melbourne benefit cost ratio was $2.15 benefit for every dollar invested. And part of the reason was exactly what you point to, is the growth in regional development. On the Southern Highlands, Canberra, Newcastle, indeed, from Brisbane, the stations were going to be obviously Gold Coast, but then Lismore, and then down through Grafton, Coffs Harbour, Port Macquarie, Taree, Newcastle, opening up. If you put Newcastle and Canberra under 1 hour from Sydney CBD, guess what? They're fantastic places to live. This city of Canberra, Australia's largest inland city, the bush capital, has a fantastic lifestyle for families. It took me an hour on Saturday to get from Marrickville to Balmain. It's about 8 kilometres on a Saturday morning. So in terms of opening up the economic development, it absolutely makes sense. Its time is here right now. Asia, Europe, Latin America and North America are all doing it, and there's no reason why Australia shouldn't be doing it as well. We do live in a vast continent with a relatively small population, but that population is concentrated down that East Coast corridor, and we should take advantage of that.
Can we move off infrastructure just before we finish? And something I want to put to you, and it troubles me greatly, and the national debate and the tone of it. I mean, bluntly, I don't hear much about sort of helping people get ahead under their own steam. We hear a lot about, sort of welfare payments. We hear a lot about sort of people helping people like that, but we don't seem to have a mantra, whether from the Labor Party or sadly even from the coalition. Now they seem to have abandoned that about, lower taxes, letting people, through their own, efforts, sort of, bring up their families, look after themselves. And, frankly, the debate now seems about more tax, about hitting people hard, and frankly, there's a smaller group who are being the ones who are paying these taxes. And I'm not just pointing the finger at the Labor Party, though I think, personally, I think that's been pretty big in the last few months. But the coalition seem to have lost that mantra. I think it's one of the reasons the Liberal Party are in trouble in the polls. So do you want to comment on that?
Look, I think you make a valid point. I think governments should always look at ways in which they can facilitate much greater activity by others, by the private sector. That's one of the things that draws me towards infrastructure. In fact, I don't want to bring it back to that, but you look at whether it's a project like the National Broadband Network, enabling business to operate so that you can operate in a regional centre and have the same access to the rest of the country and the world as if you're in a CBD, but with much lower cost structures. That's one of the great enabling factors of the National Broadband Network. I think in terms of transport infrastructure, as well, allowing people to get around is
if
also...
If I can just jump in, that's not what I was asking. I was asking about a culture in Australia where we encourage people to look after themselves, to bring up their own families and not rely on the government. I mean, sadly, we seem to be losing that.
Sure. Look, and I think that encouraging work, I mean, one of the debates that I've heard around some people in, I guess, so-called progressive areas, there's a bit of a debate about whether people should be just paid an amount and we give up on trying to find people work. That, to me, is just completely the wrong way around. People... work is a noble thing. You impart value yourself and your community
and dignity.
By what you do, and that's why I see very exciting prospects like the science park that I was talking about. That's not government investment. That's private sector investment by the people, largely driven by the people who run Steggles Chooks and who've come here. One of the great Australian success stories, come here from overseas, now second generation coming through, creating jobs in their local community. They're very proud of their Western Sydney origins. And that's what makes a difference.
Anthony, can I ask you one thing?
And I think...
Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
Can I ask you one final thing before we go, because unfortunately time's running out. Look, as a life member of the Labor Party, I'm a bit gobsmacked by this debate about the NDIS and the Medicare levy, because to me, that was one of the great achievements of the Gillard government, and it actually brought about equality and dignity to people with disability. I don't understand why the Labor Party is only putting this 1% on people over 87,000, because this is going to be a huge problem for the budget. We've got to fund the damn thing from somewhere, and 1% basically means it's a fair go for everyone. If you're on 50,000, you pay less than someone who's on 90. I must admit, I don't get it. So maybe you can explain it to me, but I would have thought this was something we all had a shared responsibility in contributing to the dignity of all Australians, regardless of their ability.
Well, on July 1, of course, the so-called temporary deficit levy on people above $180,000 is being removed. And if you do the calculations, if you keep that, but only apply the NDIS levy to those above the $87,000 figure, you, of course, then make sure that you're not putting an increased burden on lower income earners, and you, in fact, raise more revenue than the government's proposal. So that's the Labor Party proposal, and the argument is one of equity, essentially. There is real concern out there that real wages are in decline, that people are already potentially losing their penalty rates, many people on those lower income levels. And it was felt that what we shouldn't do is to place further burden on them, and that what we've come up with is a way to raise additional revenue, but do it in a way which is more progressive.
Okay, I appreciate you've got to stick with the team game, Anthony, and I respect that. Look, anyone who's had a beer named after them like you have deserves respect and courtesy. You and I are in politics. Did you have a beer named after you?
No, I've had beers thrown at me, probably.
You've had beers thrown, that's right. Yeah. I was probably throwing it. We couldn't get a beer named after us, Albo.
One of my proudest moments.
Yeah.
I'll send you fellas along a bottle each of Albo Ale. There you go.
Well, you're on. We'll keep you to that. We'll keep you to that. Albo, thank you for being with us tonight, and keep up the fight with infrastructure, because it is about growing the country. So good luck.
Thank you.
Yep, terrific to be with you.
Take care.